Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Q's Views. And today is going to be kind of an offshoot of a remark I made in the last video regarding the world of Kryn and them using steel as a currency versus platinum or gold, or they have gold, but it's not worth nearly as much as steel in that gaming world. So I decided I'd go ahead and bring out the Dragonlance book. This is the first Dragonlance book that I was introduced to in terms of um, campaign or the gaming with Dungeons and Dragons. At last, the complete Kryn source book that contains all the information necessary for limitless campaigning in the world of the Dragonlance saga provides all new information on character classes, races, artifacts, and powers that are unique to the fascinating world of Kryn. And of course, as we first open this book, we see a black and white version of the beautiful illustration on the front, which was done by Jeff Easley, one of the many great artists that worked on these early books. And I'm always fascinated and amazed, no matter how many times I see these same works of art. So here we have the writers of Dragonlance, the world of Kryn, Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss, which we know would go on to write many novels, many books, many of them which I do own and are fantastic reads for those of you who do enjoy reading and learning in depth the stories and the lore regarding all the characters in Dragonlance and the world of Kryn, plus even some outside. I would definitely suggest reading their works. Great stuff. Now, while I'm not going to go through every page of this book, I am going to go a little bit through the table of contents, just kind of see the general outline of the book, because I really like how this book is laid out. There's some times where I'll see a certain book and I'll look at the table of contents, and for me, they're not always concise. Sometimes there's a bit of confusion as to what's where. It says where it is, but sometimes they subcategorize things in a way that it makes it sometimes not as quick and easy to find as you would hope for it to be. But I think that's different with this one. In this one, it's laid out very simplistically, and everything's very concise and very easy to find, and something that I really appreciate in a book. Now, while this book isn't a very large book, it definitely helps being able to find things as quickly as possible, especially on the fly. Because even though I do believe in prep work, and I try to be very thorough in my prep work for a campaign, sometimes things will take a turn that you least expect, and you need to be able to find something extremely quickly. And I find that a well thought out and put together table of contents indeed makes that possible. So we'll go ahead and move on. The realms above, in the cradle of the sky on silken sunshine lay, we who soon upon the face of Kryn would as infant mortals play. So they have an outline for the universe, place of mortals, the tale begins. Law of consequence. Those of you who are familiar with the world of Kryn and familiar with Dragonlance will know that there's actually been quite a few changes, especially with the Pantheon regarding the governing pantheons in Kryn. I'm just going to kind of state things as they existed in this particular book, since this is the one I'm covering. Characters in Kryn. Another great piece of art by another fantastic artist. For those of you who are familiar with Dragonlance or this book, or maybe you even own this book, did you run any campaigns out of it? What was it about this book that you enjoyed? What about the information did you use to set up campaigns? I know for some, like myself, a very integral part of running a campaign in the world of Kryn were the Knights of Solamnia. So, as many of you know, there are 3 different types of Knights of Solamnia. You have the Knights of the Crown, the Knights of the Sword, and the Knights of the Rose. Now, you have to start off as a Knight of the Crown. You don't get to be whichever one you want to be right away. That is if you're going to run it according to the book. Now right here it says no character starts out as a Knight of the Sword. Characters can only attempt to enter this class after first rising to 2nd level as a Knight of the Crown and having sufficient experience points to gain 3rd level there. At that point, the character must speak of his intent to become a Knight of the Sword to a Knight of that order who is no less than 7th level. A candidate must also have the listed minimum in all the following statistics in order to qualify for the Order of the Sword. So as you can see, for many, it was a very arduous task. Actually, not that arduous. Just depends on how the DM ran the campaigns and how quickly or slowly you gained experience and levels for the game. But I know for many of the DMs that ran campaigns that I played in and many that I ran, I try to keep it fairly balanced where it's not so arduous but not so easily done either. And try to, you want to make sure that you fit the tasks and the various requirements integrally with the role playing as much as possible. Now, same with the Knights of the Rose. As we look at the Knights of the Rose here, which was the highest of the order of the Knights of Solamnia, we can see, as with the Knights of the Sword, characters do not start out as a Knight of the Rose. Characters must first have gained 2 levels as a Knight of the Crown, then be accepted as a Knight of the Sword, and earn 2 additional levels before they can be considered for the Order of the Rose. Once a character has earned sufficient hit points to become 4th level, so it's a hit point based thing in that particular regard, he can petition the Order of the Rose, to be accepted into that body. In order to be considered for the Order of the Rose, the Knight must have the following minimum characteristics, and it goes in outlining the minimum stats that a player must have in order to continue down this path. Many of us are familiar as well with the Tinker Gnomes and their various machines, which usually don't really work all that well. There have been other game systems that have borrowed from the Tinker Gnome in terms of them building things and being mechanically inclined and things sometimes working not as well. As you can see, they built this giant calculator, which is the size of many large rooms, at least comparable to a gnome. And it can't even do simple math. So that kind of gives you some idea of the Tinker Gnome and what it was that they were or not doing with their time. And here we have a table that outlines many of the various contraptions that they could make and what the materials were and how much it cost to make these crazy contraptions. And here we have a very crude drawing of a Tinker Gnome contraption, giving you some idea of some of the crazy things that Tinker Gnomes would often build. And as you continue to read, often at their own peril, unfortunately. All right, for those of you who are more magic savvy or prefer magic or magic users out there, you have the Wizards of High Sorcery and all that entails within this book. The Conclave of Wizards. So the master of the Conclave is determined by consensus, a spell that instantaneously determines the combined will of all wizards of Krynn in a single matter. While not always infallible, it is in its ability to benefit the Conclave as a whole. It still remains the method of selection for the masters of all sorceries. So it's pretty interesting. It talks about the inner workings of the Conclave and the methods they use. And I'm not going to read through all these pages, but it's very interesting and very thorough information regarding the towers, the Tower of Wayrith, and what I like as well too is it doesn't just describe the towers, but also describes the land around it, such as the Shoykan Grove of the Tower of Palanthas. And here's some fantastic maps kind of showing the inner workings of the tower. And of course, just like our Knights of Solamnia, we have our various wizards. We have our Wizards of the White Robes with their various requirements. Same with the Wizards of the Red Robes. And the White Robes are those of a lawful alignment, with the Red Robes being those of a neutral alignment. And of course, the Wizards of the Black Robes, which follow the path of evil. And then, of course, your Renegade Wizards, which are all magic users that enter into Kryn and are not part of the Order. So any magic users that come into Kryn that do not select to become part of the Conclave are considered renegades. Then we get into the various deities within this book. Now, one of my favorite deities of this book of all time is indeed Paladine. Now, there was some changes. I believe it was in the 3rd edition in the Dragonlance campaign resource book for that. And I will cover that in a future video, probably the video following this one, where a Paladine is no longer considered a deity, as he has chosen to give up his divine powers to become mortal. And of course, some more beautiful artwork. And then finally, we get into the races of Kryn, which I find quite fascinating. Now, in terms of campaigns, I have allowed some of these races to be played in the campaigns, as I find them quite interesting. One of them being the Kinder. Try not to spoil it too much about the Kinder, but let's put it to you this way. If played properly, they can be quite a nuisance to the rest of the party. You can go ahead and take a quick look at some of their statistical information. One thing I do like about the world of Dragonlance and Kryn here is that the different elves are broken up into their various types. We have the Sylvanesti, which are the high elves, as you can see for yourself here, breaking down their history and philosophies and societies. Same with the Qualinesti, the Kaganesti, which was one of my favorites to run, which are the wild elves, which are very interesting to play. Go ahead and take a quick look at some of their stat requirements. And of course, a type of elf I don't feel gets quite the attention they deserve, and that's the Dragonlance and the Daimernesti, which are, as it says, the sea elves, which I think are a fascinating race, and I think are not utilized nearly as much as they should be. And you can go ahead and take a look at some of their requirements, minimum requirements. Another fascinating race here in Dragonlance for me are the Dark Elves, not to be confused with the Drow Elves. And here's another amazing piece of artwork. And of course, dwarves. In my opinion, dwarves are very important to utilize as much as possible within a campaign. And we get our the dwarves of Kryn. We have the hill dwarves, the mountain dwarves, the gully dwarves, which are also known as the Agar. And of course, many of us are also familiar with the Urda. And also, as you can see here, the Kryn Minotaurs, which is a race I find very interesting, and I have allowed them to be played in previous campaigns. And here's another breathtaking piece of artwork. All the artwork in this book, in my opinion, is absolutely amazing. Go ahead and move into the creatures of Kryn real quick, where we have our Draconians. Of course, there's different versions, such as the Auroch, the Baz, the Capax, Zax, and the Civax. Dream Wraith, Fetch, Ice Bears, Bloodsea Minotaurs, and what Dragonlance campaign would be complete without the Shadow People. The Noi, the Walrus Men, that was always a fun one to utilize in a campaign. As well as, of course, you can't have a Dragonlance campaign without dragons. At least it seems kind of odd to not have dragons within Dragonlance. Rules for Dragons, along with another very amazing piece of art. Pre-Cataclysmic Ancelon. Here's the scroll that belongs to the Asnist of Palanthas. The Tower of Palanthas. You can kind of read through this and the River of Time. Very interesting stuff, and I do recommend a thorough read through this if you really want to understand a lot of what took place over the timeline. Just real quick, just some of the NPCs from long ago that helped shape the world of Krynn. Humo, and of course one of my favorites, Fist and Dauntless. Some of you may be aware of this particular character. Same with Asnus of Palanthas, which I just mentioned just a moment ago. Alright, jump forward just ahead to some of the magical items. One of them, of course, being the Bloodstone of Fist and Dauntless, which is a very interesting item. Here we have a map. Here we have a map of post-war Ancelon. So there we have it. The official AD&D Dragonlance Adventures book. And a very fantastic book, in my opinion, by Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss. For ages in the past, beyond memory and word, in the first blush of the world, dragons terrible and great made war on this world of Krynn. So if you don't own this book already, I do highly recommend you try to pick up a copy. I know to get them in pretty good shape, they can be fairly expensive these days. But if you're fascinated with some of the history of Dragonlance, of the world of Krynn, or you're still playing AD&D campaigns from time to time, and you want something flavorful and interesting to add to your campaigns, I definitely recommend this book. And this is Q with Q's View saying thanks for watching. I do appreciate your time. This was kind of a lengthier video, so I do appreciate those of you who stuck by to the end. And I look forward to seeing you next video. Thanks for your likes, your subscriptions, for your shares, and your comments. And we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.